This is going to be our introductory video to the thesis statement. The thesis occupies a short but very important piece of the rubric with 4 elements. The first and most important is that our thesis needs to be argumentative. That means that reasonable people could have a difference of opinion about the topic. So on the left here, we have a thesis that isn't argumentative. College tuition causes some people to be unable to attend college, some families to spend down life savings, and some students to acquire inescapable levels of student loan debt. That's just factual. It's not argumentative. No reasonable person could disagree. We all know that that is happening. But on the right, we have a much more specific statement. College tuition costs can be reduced by multifaceted and proactive management of the problem, including aggressive scholarship seeking, inclusion of dual credit and community college credits, and a clear and early choice of major. This is much more specific advice, and while it's still a big claim, right, that tuition can become manageable if you use some of these tactics, and someone might disagree and say, no, it's still way too high. The reasonable people could have different points of view. So do not do the non-argumentative thesis, which is obvious, which any reasonable person would agree with. You want instead something not so obvious, much more specific, and about which reasonable people might disagree. Another challenging piece of the thesis is that the subpoints should be listed at the end of the statement, and those subpoints should be parallel. That means they should be conceptually parallel, roughly equal in importance and type, and phrased in a similar way, which is grammatically parallel. In my examples here, I show you some non-parallel sentences, and then the problem, and then the parallel sentence. So for example, not parallel. The 3 key components of grandma's lasagna are the pasta, the tomato sauce, and the tomatoes that go in the sauce. The problem is the tomatoes are part of the sauce. They're not an equal piece. That's 2 things that repeat. Okay? So in my parallel sentence, I say, the key components of grandma's lasagna are the pasta, the sauce, and the cheeses. Those are 3 equal parts. Grandma buys the cheese, makes the sauce, and Grandpa makes the pasta isn't a parallel phrasing either, because Grandma is doing 2 of the things and Grandpa's doing the 3rd one. So you can see a difference in phrasing there. The last item is phrased differently because we introduced Grandpa. But if we write, Grandma buys the cheese, makes the sauce, and assigns the pasta production to Grandpa, we've made it parallel, because the verbs there are buys, makes, and assigns. Those are equal. So if we just move Grandpa to the end, we can make parallel phrasing there. Parallel phrasing is very difficult, and it can take a while to look at your thesis sentence and rewrite it a few times until you have parallelism. Now for some much easier issues. The thesis sentence goes at the end of the first paragraph. And often people will say, oh no, it could go anywhere, it could go somewhere else. For sure it could. However, people who are reading your paper are not always the most attentive, and they're not always going to hunt around for your thesis. In fact, I would say that's fairly rare. So you want to get that thesis exactly where they're expecting it. Okay? Where are they expecting it? Right there at the end of the first paragraph. So I know that doesn't seem very creative, but just do it that way. It's just the safe approach. If you should be writing a thesis for a literary paper, the task is to, first of all, respond to whatever the instructor assigns, but a fairly obvious literary paper or common or beginner one, such as we have in Comp 2 in my class, is a literary analysis paper. And in that case, what you want to get is for your main idea, the main point or theme of the piece of literature, right? So what is the author's point about life that they're trying to make? And then for the subpoints, you would list the specific story elements or poetic devices that you're going to discuss. So I have a few examples here. For a story, the pride of Mathilde Loisel leads to her destruction, as shown in the characterization, tone, and plot. So pride leads to destruction, as shown in characterization, tone, and plot. Those are my 3 subpoints. Here's one for Emily Dickinson's poem, Some Keep the Sabbath Going to Church. Dickinson compares her church service to taking a walk in the garden, finding the latter for her a more religious experience. She makes her point using setting, rhythm, rhyme, and alliteration. You'll notice that here I have 2 independent clauses joined by a semicolon. That's okay. The thesis sentence can be long. That's okay. You just want to make sure that you're including that main idea, what is the theme, and then the subpoints of the story elements or poetic devices you're going to discuss. And each of those will get discussed in a paragraph with some samples from the piece. So those are our 4 thesis components on the rubric, 3 plus some special considerations if we're doing a literary paper. Thank you.